This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
As I've seen my peers start having children and talk to more moms, see the news articles that come by, I have realized that the issue of postpartum depression has been a leading deter of people having more children or any children at all. It seems to come back over and over again, coming up in conversations with people I don't even know. Yeah, I only had one. I couldn't do it. I couldn't have another one. I was so depressed. It was so hard after. I love my child. I'd love to have more, but I just can't do that again. Some people are talking about pregnancy, but a lot of people are talking about postpartum depression. And so for me, over the last couple of years, I've realized more and more we need to talk about postpartum depression. I remember even, especially after my first, I struggled. I fell into a depression that I was working through that was more so related to the fact that we moved across the country with a newborn baby for almost 2 years. And my new experience of motherhood was being at home 6 days a week and going to church in a very isolated community. The Midwest was great, but it was really challenging to develop relationships in a new area, especially with being a new parent. There were so many elements that I really wasn't experiencing postpartum depression, but I was experiencing a depression at the same time as postpartum. It was actually interesting. Do you know that about half of women who experience postpartum depression actually already had depression as a comorbidity before pregnancy? So it's not actually postpartum depression. Now, I'm not here to say that your experience after having a baby is negated, but I really had an aha moment this week when I was reading an article at EV Magazine by a Norwegian psychiatrist named Dr. Hannah Spear. And Dr. Hannah Spear is very known for really exposing the anti-feminist psychiatry that is out there today, exposing bad therapy and what she says are liberal narratives that continue to pour out into our mental health crisis of today. I am very struck by her, actually, but she wrote this article on how motherhood became a diagnosis. And what she really does is point to this whole anti-baby, anti-being a mom culture. It is pouring out into an area that we haven't realized. It's pouring out into this postpartum depression label. And I think it's important to pay attention. Essentially, what psychologist Dr. Hannah Spear is arguing is that there's a false narrative right now that makes motherhood a risk factor for your livelihood, for your very life. And I think this is significant. I just had my third baby 4 months ago. And it's funny because when I think about having a baby in that special time after having the child, I like to call it newborn land. Because you're in an upside down world where your days and nights are mixed up, because babies' days and nights are mixed up. Where you're snuggling and cuddling with the cutest little squish of a baby, but they're demanding everything. Your sleep, your energy. They're making you eat more than you realize because you need to eat to keep up with how much they're nursing. I can think of all the times my husband would prepare a multiple middle of the night snacks because I was so ravenous at night. With the third baby, he got ahead. He would prepare the snacks before he went to bed for the night. So it would help with a little less of a disruption in the middle of the night that I'm not sitting here going, I'm so hungry. It is so challenging going through the postpartum season. But maybe, just maybe, instead of it being postpartum depression, maybe it's just adjusting to a new human in our lives. I remember when I got married and I was having a hard time keeping up. I laugh now with 3 kids, just keeping up with the laundry. My laundry seemingly tripled, and if it was the winter season, it quadrupled. they change so often. I'm talking about our husbands, not necessarily the kids, not all. But it became a new thing, from the workout clothes to the bedtime clothes to the daytime. And their clothes are bigger than ours as women. I remember being so surprised by the shock of the increase in laundry. And I have been with every new little human that's entered into my life. It's funny, I was reading a statement in this article that I could so deeply relate to, where Dr. Hannah Spears talks about the woman who says she was crying in the middle of the night because she couldn't keep up. I feel like I can never catch up, as some women might say to her. Sounds like me all the time with my new messy house, and I'm learning to be more and more tolerant and patient at times with the mess. But what's really going on here when it comes to postpartum depression? Change is hard. Loving a new human is hard. But what's really going on behind the scenes is, as Dr. Hannah Spears is saying, it's become a narrative. It's become a mantra. Not only is it postpartum depression now, but it's prolonged postpartum depression. As if the baby is the problem. Having kids is the problem. I want to walk through parts of her article because I thought it was very provocative to help us really situate and understand that this whole postpartum depression mantra, and she doesn't say this, is really what's become an anti-life, pro-abortion mindset that is fueling the contraceptive mindset, and another thing that's preventing people from having more babies. You see, a century ago, postpartum was understood as a season of recovery where our bodies are significantly changing as women. It also was a season of renewing and rejuvenating our bodies and developing new relationships. But today, it's treated as a psychiatric crisis. With all of the monitoring that goes on, the questionnaires that if you have been pregnant, you know, during pregnancy and postpartum, you have that 10-question questionnaire where you have to rate on a scale your sleep, your ability to laugh, your ability to keep up. And every time I take that questionnaire, I kind of laugh because I answer honestly and go, well, of course I feel this way. I'm having a really hard pregnancy and I can barely stay awake because in my case, I'm loaded with unreal amounts of progesterone in order to keep this baby from miscarrying or going into preterm labor. So of course I feel this way. But you have to understand the reality of it. So then suddenly a label is put on you or on myself for being at high risk of depression. And so there's a watch alert. As if that watch alert, what is it going to do? I've had this for the last 2 of my pregnancies because I've had very, very difficult pregnancies and they've only gotten worse the last 2. And yet you look at postpartum depression, and that screening is supposed to help us see how bad things are rather than recognizing this is or conversing about the reality of the transition. This is all being done to intentionally deter us as women and spouses from having children to begin with, or more children. You've heard it before. I have talked to so many women, strangers, who have said, yeah, the moment you say, oh, hey, I see you have a kid, you're saying that, yeah, I'm not going to have any more. Postpartum was so difficult. Over the last 10 years, in fact, postpartum depression diagnosis, the label has doubled. In the United States, we have nearly universal mental health screening for all pregnant and postpartum women from practitioners, and it's really in order to maintain their licensing and insurance now. But again, it's become a mantra. Are you sure you want to have more children? Are you sure you're ready? Not that those questions aren't legitimate, but look at how it's being fueled everywhere, online, in our online magazines, news. In fact, the new narrative is prolonged postpartum depression. We've heard the mantra before, 1 in 7 women experience postpartum depression, but now it's weaponized to instill either one, fear in women, or justify this it's too hard, I have to get away self-care approach that is leaving women believing they have to get away on expensive breaks or have to leave the home altogether and go to work because they just can't cope at home. I actually have a much higher belief in women that we can, and I'm not going to say muscle through, but that we can work through the changes to accepting and embracing a whole nother human being. I've said before, with each person who's come into my life, into my house, I've had to give up certain things. With my second daughter, the big thing that I had to give up is I gave up using social media, something that was fun, entertaining, even informative, a news source. I had to give it up completely. I don't remember the last time I went and looked at Facebook requests, and I could go on. Birthday wishes. I'm dating myself by even saying that you look at that on Facebook now, right? But things have to give. Things that have to give are my expectations of myself and my family for how clean my house actually is. Now, Dr. Hannah Spear, the psychologist, Norwegian psychologist who wrote this article, I'm linking to it in the show notes and on social media, said behind the language of awareness, that is about postpartum depression, she says, lies a worldview that quietly recasts motherhood itself as a risk factor. What should be a beautiful and strengthening journey of womanhood and a contribution to society in a way only women can, deserving of reverence and respect, has been rewritten as a vulnerability, a condition said to place women at risk for long-term psychological distress. Do you see that? Motherhood has been recast as a condition of psychological distress rather than looking at the awe in the mystery of the creation, carrying delivery, nursing, and caring for a new life. She goes on to say it makes women feel like fragile objects in need of supervision rather than empowered and dignified, capable of adaptation. You see, the anti-motherhood culture of abortion and contraception has fueled the postpartum depression conversation. You see, this is, I think, a very, very keen insight that Dr. Hannah Spear had. She said, once motherhood was declared optional, that is by abortion, contraception, all of that. Once motherhood was declared optional, she said, the next step was to make it look dangerous. What better way to discourage it than to warn women that it might make them sick, she says. Wow, did you hear that? And I really bring this up because, over the last couple of years, I've seen postpartum depression has been the leading reason why women say they don't want more children. They can't do it again. But I didn't realize that while I thought this was just a symptom of the blues of having a baby for some that go extended and we're having a hard time adapting, in reality, it's being used as a mantra of the anti-life, anti-woman culture. And it is anti-woman to say that we shouldn't have babies or should have fewer. So when Dr. Hannah Spear said this, a light turned on for me this week. And I went, I have to talk about it. And I'm going to repeat it. She said, once motherhood was declared optional, the next step was to make it look dangerous. What better way to discourage it than to warn women that it might make them sick? Let's talk about what postpartum is. It's an adjustment to a new human person. It's just that. It's a special season of welcoming new life. I like to call it newborn land. So when I have a family member or a friend who just had a baby, I'll check in here and there. How's newborn land? That upside down land of no sleep. You kind of feel like you're floating because you slept so little, but you are just in love with the cuddles. Instead of this postpartum mantra that is justifying not having children because you're so miserable, what if it's just a season of adjustment? Babies having children, look at it from the Catholic perspective. The Catholic Church teaches you can't get married. You can, or should I say, you will not have a valid marriage if you go into marriage planning not to have children. The primary end of marriage, the Catholic Church teaches, is the procreation and education of children. That means to have babies and educate them. And I'm not just talking about STEM education, English education, reading. It's educate and form them to be excellent, faith-filled, virtuous, good human beings. So if the primary end is children, well, doesn't that say something about our vocation in marriage? That to help us grow in virtue, to help us grow closer to God, because ultimately everything in our faith is about entering into union with Him. Getting rid of our sins, eradicating our sins and our bad behavior and our selfishness. Having children is meant for our perfection and sanctification. That's why it's so hard. So this postpartum depression obsession is actually counterintuitive to the great gift of human life and the church beckoning us to become parents, to have children, and to raise them in the faith. You can join me and listen on the Relevant Radio app to Trending with Timmerie live each weekday at 6 p.m. Central. Thanks for listening.